Designers love talking about empathy, especially when it's empathy for users. But what about your stakeholders? What about that PM who has tons of design opinions or that executive who seems to derail your research findings in the middle of a meeting? Well, if you've ever felt like your ideas were ignored or steamrolled, well, stick around. We're going to unpack why empathy can't just stop at the user and what you should do about it. What's up, UX fam? How's your mom and them? Welcome to another episode of Beyond UX Design. I'm Jeremy. If you're new here, welcome. I am super stoked to have you. You ever ship a feature that should have never seen the light of day or survive a sprint planning where nothing got planned? Or maybe you just said, let's circle back under your breath for the 50th time this week. Well, you, my friend, have earned a Merit-ish badge. Introducing the Beyond UX Design Merit Badges, a vintage-inspired sticker series for UX designers, PMs, and engineers who have seen things. Choose from 3 sets: Soft Skills, Sharp Tongue, Cult of Figma Initiation, the Pixel Pusher Survival Kit, and more to come, so stay tuned. Each set of 5 badges celebrates the chaos, the coping, and the conference calls that should have been DMs. Stick them on your laptop and flaunt them at your stand-up. Show the world you made it out of Q2 with your sanity mostly intact. Get 1 set of 5 stickers for $12 or 2 sets for $20 at beyonduxdesign.com/badges. Just promise me one thing: send pics and show me where you stick them. How often do you stare at a blank Figma canvas, unsure where to start? This episode is brought to you by Mobbin, the ultimate UI and UX design inspiration library. Mobbin gives you instant access to over 400,000 beautifully designed UI and user flows from apps that you love, and content is added weekly, so you never have to start from scratch again. Quickly find exactly what you need, search by app category, UI patterns, or even specific features. And my team and I use Mobbin daily at work to find useful patterns, and it helps my team work much more efficiently. And honestly, I can't imagine kicking off a new feature without Mobbin. So ready to level up your design process? Visit mobbin.com/beyondux to get 20% off Mobbin Pro today and never run out of inspiration again. And if you haven't done already, please consider subscribing to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you are regular here and you feel like you're getting something out of the show, I would love it if you left a 5-star review. That'll help me out so much more than you can imagine. And as always, thanks so much to Chris, Siraquan, Stacy, Roddy, Megan, Andrew, John, Mark, Kevin, Jason, Michelle, Marty, Tino, Adina, and Zoe for all their support. And if you want to join these fine folks and many others and help keep the show independent and ad-free, you'll get exclusive access to the entire video library of episodes, including episodes before they're even released. Get instant access to those videos right now for as little as $5 a month. And for more information on how you can support the show and help more people find out about what we're doing, make sure to check out beyonduxdesign.com/support. And of course, if you think the shows we're sharing, then for the love of God, tell your mom and them. So empathy, relationships, all these things are so important. And they're important because software is hard. And software is hard not because the code, although the code is hard, let's be honest. But software gets really hard because of the people that we work with every day. PMs, engineers, the whole lot of them. So I'm so excited to have Thomas and Lawton. They're principal consultants at Drillbit Labs. They help product teams find clarity through research strategy and a whole lot of pattern recognition. You might also know them from Depth, a well-regarded newsletter on research and product strategy. And I've got Thomas and Lawton on the show today. And we're going to talk all about why empathy cannot stop with users and why it's so important to have empathy for your team. Thomas and Lawton, welcome to Beyond UX Design, guys. I am so excited to have you on, suffering through this heat wave with us without the fans on, all for the sake of high quality audio. I appreciate it, guys. Welcome to Beyond UX Design. How's it going?
Yeah, Jeremy. Stoked to be here.
Yeah, I've been really looking forward to this conversation. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, of course. And it has been, I think it's been a while since we started talking, and I'm excited to have you guys finally come in. I think Amy Santee, if I'm not mistaken, introduced us. Is that correct?
Good memory. I think so.
So shout out to Amy, friend of the show. Thanks for coming on. All right, guys. So let's talk a little bit about this. You guys have a lot of experience dealing with teams, and you've both been in this business for a long time. I know I kind of read that brief little bio there, but tell us a little bit about you guys and a little bit about Drillbit Labs and how you guys came to this realization that empathy is important for your team.
Thank you. So, yeah, a little bit about myself. I've been in UX specifically as a research specialist for almost 10 years now, coming into the field by way of kind of the academic route. Thomas and I met in grad school, getting PhDs in human factors.
Really? Okay. Dr. Thomas, are you guys doctors? Did you finish?
Within a day of each other, actually, within 24 hours of each other.
Yeah, so Thomas has been a doctor for a little while longer than me, but yeah, we're almost twins in that respect. But yeah, I think this topic, certainly started to reveal itself to me in my very first internship, reading between the lines of the politics that were going on and swirling around. Obviously, I wasn't a huge part of that, but I could tell that there was a little bit of this dynamic going on already. So
I want to plus one that a bit. It feels like this topic is something that the industry has just been trying to say, something that we've been observing all along the way. Like from grad school, which is a very different situation where we are surrounded day to day by other folks getting their PhDs in human factors and human computer interaction, to a situation where, like Jeremy, you said, we've got PM, we got design, all sorts of product folks, work with engineers, and we all have to come together to make product happen. It's a very different situation, a different set of motivations, different set of goals. And just throughout my career, it kind of feels like the number one lesson that these dynamics have been trying to teach me is that everything's going to work best if we can have some level of empathy, some level of understanding of exactly what it is that the different folks that we work with value, and positioning maybe some of the things that we are trying to push for, some user value, as, I guess, harmonious with what they want, whether that's, a feasible product that can actually be something engineering can do, or something that achieves a certain business objective the PM has, or something that they're maybe bonused on. So it just feels like this is the lesson that I guess every job I've ever had has been trying to tell me all along the way.
Yeah, it's really interesting too. Both of you have a doctorate in, I guess, almost, like human factors, which I kind of think of as sort of like, in a way, psychology, the way humans think about the machines they're interacting with. And, humans, as you guys obviously know, tons of biases. We use tons of heuristics and mental shortcuts to help us think a certain way or finish a certain task. And a lot of times, those biases and heuristics and mental shortcuts lead to tons of conflict within, as it relates to team dynamics. And I know, human factors is a little different than how like psychology as it relates to team dynamics. But I'm curious, like from your schooling and stuff you learned, how did that apply, or how does what you learned when it comes to human factors relate to how we can apply some of those psychology principles to working with teams and team members?
That's an interesting call out, Jeremy, because I think you're right. Because of our background, because of the things that we've studied, we might be able to put a name to certain things a little bit more easily, right? We can tell you when it's fundamental attribution error. We can look at a team that's having some social loafing issues, and we can describe them. But really, I guess a PhD might overqualify you to see these team dynamics, right? Like, I think we can all learn to recognize them. We might just get a little bit more precise with what we call these phenomena. What do you think, Lawton?
we can dissect it, I guess, and maybe go deep in the theory. But I think at a fundamental level, this is just people interacting with people. And I mean, it's hard to separate yourself from that, right? You're a part of that equation. But I think this is something that you don't need to have a PhD to really understand or to try to solve.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. I love that. Yeah, and it's interesting too, because when I think about this, like I think I've been doing this thing called the cognition catalog for a while. I actually haven't done it in months because I've been so busy with work. But I do this thing every week. I would find a new cognitive bias and talk about it. And there's a lot of really interesting ones. And what there's a lot of people that take, UX law, the laws of UX, for instance, and apply it to like UI design. But what I try to do is take these biases and things like that and apply them to how we work with our team. And the one thing that's always struck out at me is like in-group, out-group bias, and how, the others, we other these people that are not designers, and we other people outside of our team. And then we end up thinking like, oh, those PMs are always out to get us, or they're trying to take our job, or they won't give us a seat at the table. The engineers, they don't care about design. They're just, they're so sloppy and all that stuff. And I'm curious, like from your perspective, like, why do you think designers tend to do this? Preach empathy for users, but we just completely ignore it. Why do we do that? Do you guys have any thoughts on that? You ever thought about why we tend to just ignore our team when it comes to empathy?
Yeah, I've got some starter thoughts, and I think Lawton will probably add to these. I love that you're calling out the in-group, out-group bias, I think that's probably like this central figure in this play. When it comes right down to it, Jeremy, I think it's just a perspective taking is a difficult task. It's not something that comes naturally. You don't naturally think in someone else's mindset. You think in your mindset, right? That's the way that we think over 90% of the time throughout our day. And so when we're interacting with others, it is effortful and difficult to think about taking a step back and really just not even trying to place your own values on it or what you want, just legitimately thinking, what information is this other person receiving? What is their context coming into this? What are they going for? Why are they approaching it this way? And then working with them on that level. It's just not necessarily a natural thing to do. And so you bring up the irony that a large part of the job in UX is empathy for a user. But then we don't extend that empathy to others that we work with. In a way, it's just because we've been trained. It is part of our job that we practice day in and day out for years to have that empathy for the user. It's not natural on day one. You had to learn that. And just the same, I think it's a process of learning how to do that with other folks who have different levels of motivations on teams that you work in. At least that's the way I see it. Well, I don't know if you've got more to add or completely different perspective on it.
No, I love that. And I actually, you called out, you by the way, you guys did something most guests don't, put together a whole document outlining some of your thoughts, and which makes my job a lot easier, to be perfectly honest. Thank you. But one of the things you called out in this document is the paradox there. And I love this, the idea, like the UX empathy paradox. It's an interesting thing. I don't know. Why do we do this? I don't know, but we tend to do it a lot. And I don't know if you have any thoughts, any additional thoughts there, but that idea of a paradox is always is fascinating to me.
Yeah, I think I want to just pull on something Thomas said, which is empathizing with users is not something natural. It's something that we learn to do. And specifically, we think of it almost like a process. There's this life cycle that a product goes through. And at each stage, there are different activities that we apply. And so it's not really something that you just get good at and, oh, I can think like a user. Like, you have to apply these activities to doing it. It's effortful. It's, if you want, cognitively, even like from an energy level, costly to do this. So it makes some sense that, just because we can do it in this one area where we have a principled approach to doing it, it's not going to come naturally. And, we're not going to be able to just do that without trying, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I love that you call that out too, because it is true. Like, this is something we always say. I mean, this is something. How often do we hear, we're not our users, right? And we say that all the time because we tend to think that we know better than the users, and so that's a great call out. Like, it is something that we do have to learn. And I don't know if there's something here, but I often wonder, why, when I think about why this happens. When I think about boot camps, when I think about 4-year degrees, even for design, we're often taught how to do the work, the actual work, the hard skills. We're taught, maybe a design process, design thinking, or we do, exercises, we do research exercises or whatever. And we're never taught working with other people that are not designers, very rarely. Like, I can't think of a single program that I know of, maybe they exist, where you learn how to build software along with people who are also in the computer science program, who are also learning how to build software in a completely different way. And, it's kind of interesting when I think about that, like why this happens. I don't know if you have any thoughts about, I mean, we could probably get in a whole like conversation about education and how education is failing the software industry. Anyway, I don't know. I just sort of an interesting thought. I don't know if you have any things to add to that.
It reminds me of all throughout school, the group project and being told, everyone would kind of roll their eyes and be like, oh, I don't want to be doing a group project. But the teacher would always say, this is what it's going to be like in the real world. You're going to be thrown together with a bunch of other people, and some of them aren't going to pull their weight, and some of them are going to contribute more, or, have a stronger perspective that they're trying to lay on you. But yeah, that's probably, I mean, that and just life itself, right? There's no formal education for stakeholder management and interpersonal relationships.
It's almost like we need cross-class projects, because a lot of times when we're talking about those group projects in classes, it's a set of folks all studying for the same thing and to do the same thing. It's almost like we need to like go across departments, get people from different majors working together a little bit more.
We did that to an extent in grad school. So human factors as a discipline has sort of like the psychology side, but also there's an engineering side where people are thinking more about like literal physical ergonomics and stuff. So Thomas and I took a few classes over there, and it was interesting, like, oh, they're talking the same language as us, but they're thinking about it in a completely different way. So maybe that was a little bit of an education there.
I don't know. I was just kind of thinking, but this is sort of a conversation. I never thought about this before. It was kind of interesting when I think about design. I've talked to a lot of people about design education, and designers are generally taught how to design an interface. Very rarely are we ever taught about how to get that thing shipped to production. Because at the end of the day, that's really what matters most. And that's why we're having this conversation today, because if you can't work with those people to get that design shipped, you're just essentially, wasting everyone's time, if not just your own time. And so I don't know, this would be really interesting if anyone's listening and wants to try this out, but take a computer science, course and a design course, put them together to get those people actually building and shipping the thing. I don't even know, are there even product manager courses? I guess they have that. Like at college, I don't know. There are other project management boot camps, like there are design and engineering boot camps. The three-legged stool boot camp. It's an idea. Someone wants to take that as an opportunity. Go ahead, give me a cut. I only ask for 5%, something very low. But yeah, so that idea though, it's a learned thing. It's something that we have to actively teach ourselves. And what's really interesting, you guys called this out in our conversation before, but empathy, these tools that we have for users are available to us. We just don't apply them to the people that we work with. So talk to me a little bit about that. Like we know it's a problem. We know people, don't do this. Using the tools that we have at our disposal, we're already good at doing this often for users. How do we just turn them on, internally towards the other people that we work with every day?
It's going to be deliberate practice, Lawton. I think you can probably start to articulate a lot of the specific ways of going about this. But we work really closely together. So you hear me do this all the time where we'll talk about some situation and then I'll stop and say, you know what? If I was in their situation, I had all the information they had, I had their background, and I was thinking through this, I would be doing and thinking and saying the exact same things with them. So what do we do? Right? It's something that comes up in our conversations all the time. It's deliberate. Just because, you and I talk about this and we think about this all the time doesn't mean we still don't have to pause and say, wait, what is it that we're dealing with? And I think there's a couple different ways you can start to approach that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the classic methods that you'll hear researchers talk about, there's some researchers who get really, really methodical about this, but just stakeholder interviews where before you kick off a project and you're going to do some user research, you spend some time talking with the people who have a stake in what the results are and try to understand what is it that they're trying to learn? What is this going to feed into? What are the goals of this research? So something like that, very simple. A lot of people already do that, but it's literally practicing this. It's like, let's make sure that this is something you're going to use because you're the user, so to speak, of this research.
Yeah, we should do stakeholder interviews, but let's treat them a little bit more like conversations too. Like you said, some people get a little too methodical. They'll get a little bit too of their camp about it. And that almost is counterproductive. If you approach it as a really structured interview with a stakeholder, they're like, why is this researcher coming to me and being so researchy about something we can just talk about openly? We're on the same team here. So that's a funny one. That's something that obviously is at the kind of a front end of a project that you just talked about, right? You can do these conversations to really figure out what matters to them. On the very other end, again, speaking of researchers, if you've done a project and we've talked about, all right, this is what really matters to our stakeholders, and we've got some findings and some real recommendations about things that we need to do to deliver on user value, we can then go back and reconnect to what we found in those discovery interviews with stakeholders, right? We can say, hey, we found A. A causes B for users and also causes C for the business, which isn't so good. But we can do D to then achieve E, and E connects back to their goal, right? Lawton, I think you published about this recently. You call that the FIRE framework for presenting results. Does a really good job of framing up not just what we value, which is that user empathy and user value, but it then connects it and shows the implications of what it means for business goals.
And that's really just like a rhetorical flourish, right? This isn't necessarily psychology, or there's nothing too fancy about it, right? But it's presenting information in a way that's kind of sensitive to how it's going to be perceived and how it's going to be received by your audience. And what I've seen a lot of researchers do instead is here's a bullet pointed list of all my recommendations at the end of the report. And, people just aren't going to be able to take action on that. So framing it in a way that people are going to be able to understand why this is important and what this is going to do for me, that's going to actually, like you said, get shipped into the product. And that's what we care about.
So, Thomas, you mentioned something a minute ago. I want to kind of circle back to this. There's so much to unpack with with both of you guys. You said I'm going to go down. I'm going to try to not forget. I'm writing notes here, but the first thing that you said, I think is really fascinating is a lot of people will treat stakeholder interviews and they'll be very methodical about it. And they will almost treat the stakeholder almost like a research subject. And then the stakeholder starts to feel like a lab rat, but these are people that you work with and will continue to work with on a daily basis. And making them feel uncomfortable, you're sort of you might be getting some interesting insights, but at the same time, focusing so much on that method and that methodology and ignoring the fact that this is a person and it's a colleague and it's someone that you're probably going to be communicating with on a regular basis. You got to get those insights out of them. But at the same time, you've got to have a good relationship so that they feel comfortable talking to you all the time on an ongoing basis. They feel comfortable reaching out to you. They feel comfortable pinging you on the side with random thoughts that they had or looping you into conversations that you might have gotten left out of. And I thought that was really fascinating is these are not research subjects the same that maybe a user is that you're never going to talk to that one user again. But these are people that you're working with on a daily basis. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but that was just something you called out. I thought that was a really fascinating thing to maybe highlight.
Yeah, right. Conversations with stakeholders aren't just an opportunity for you to gain information about them. It is actually a opportunity to deepen your connection with them. Just like you said, after that conversation, they might really feel like you understand them. They ping you on the side, right? It helps establish that rapport, which again, helps you all throughout the rest of the process. So I like the fact that you kind of called out some of the specifics there of what people might notice if they treat it more like a conversation that fosters a sense of we're on the same side, right? On the other hand, if you treat it too much like a cold, and I don't want to say this because a lot of people do a really good job of framing research in a warm way with participants, but if you treat it too methodical, too, I guess, prescriptive, again,
clinical kind of
clinical.
Way,
that's the perfect word, Jeremy. Clinical. If you're too clinical about it, you almost increase your distance to them. It almost increases the sense of self versus other in that conversation.
Yeah, I love that. And Lawton, you mentioned something I just want to call out as well when you're presenting these findings. We talk about empathy and the importance of it, but part of it is understanding, again, that these are people and stakeholders are not a monolith, right? Product managers are not a monolith. Executives are not a monolith. They don't all think and act exactly in the same way. And knowing that, you can't know what to present, how to present, what to highlight, how to frame it, right? You could frame data in a bunch of different ways. What's going to resonate with that audience? And if I haven't had those conversations and gotten to the point where I'm empathizing with them, what do they care about? What keeps them up at night? What are they worried about? If you present this thing and they're like, but what about this other thing that I'm actually way more concerned with? They're going to dismiss all the things that you presented and the work you've done, and you've lost credibility with them. And, that seat at the table or whatever it is, the influence that we want, you lose it because you didn't take the time to understand them and their needs and what they care about and making assumptions that they're executives, so they must care about blah, blah, blah. Because you never know. And so figuring that out and framing it, you mentioned it's called the FIRE framework. I don't know if you want to talk about that, but how you can use that to frame it in a way that resonates with them. Is that something you want to dig into a little bit? I don't know. Be kind of interesting to hear about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So FIRE, it's an acronym standing for finding, implication, recommendation, and then the expectation. Okay, so you're a researcher, you've gone out, you've talked to users, you've done a usability test, and you have a finding. You have, this is a problem or an opportunity that we can improve for the user. So simply stating what that is and where it's happening, describing it so that a stakeholder can understand it. The implication is going to be, okay, now that we know what that is, what does that mean for the business? What does that mean if I'm a product manager and I'm being held accountable to such and such KPIs every quarter? How is this finding related to that? And to your point, Jeremy, you need to do the work ahead of time before you're presenting all this out to understand what those connections are. All right, so once you have the finding and the implication, now's the time to actually state, this is what we should do about it. And you can get down to, nitty gritty, like, here's a design recommendation. We need to take this out. It could be more directional, but that's where you state, this is what we should do to address that finding. And then after the recommendation, give an expectation. What is the outcome that's likely to happen to this? So if this usability issue is affecting this KPI, fixing it would then do the opposite. It would actually either completely make that problem go away, or it would improve that KPI. So again, just framing that in a really tight way, the finding, the implication, the recommendation, and the expectation, that's kind of your framework if you're delivering a research finding, if you want a recommendation that's going to stick.
Yeah, so I don't think this is related necessarily, but you said expectation, and this makes me think back to what we were originally talking about, like why a lot of this happens. But when I think about a lot of the issues that we run into, and we could even maybe use this as like based on like the scenario where I present something and the outcome is not what I expected. I think if like, and this is, I'd love to get your thoughts on this too, by the way. When I think about like conflict at work, when stuff happens or things don't go the way we expected, a lot of it has to do with the fact that we have mismatched expectations. I expect one thing, and again, thinking about these heuristics and these mental shortcuts and biases, I come in with my own set of biases, my own mental shortcuts, and assume because you're a product manager, you're going to think and act a certain way. And because I'm a designer, I'm going to think and act a certain way. And they're going to come in with their own expectations and their own biases. And if you're not having conversations and understanding where they're coming from and not building that empathy, I expect this, you expect that. We never talked about what our expectations are for each other. And then when we finish the thing, we're unaligned and we're mad and we're upset because those expectations were totally off. It's different, I think, from what you're talking about in the context of this presentation and the FIRE framework, but it made me think of that. And I don't know, I wonder, thinking back, we probably should have talked about this before we got into this other stuff, but I just thought of this. But thinking about that, I'm curious, like as a researcher, what kind of methods might we have at our disposal to help figure those things out so that our expectations are aligned and we do know what to expect and they're very clear?
Yeah, I think it all goes together, Jeremy. So we've talked about stakeholder interviews at the start of a project, and here's how you might present recommendations at the end of a project. But you brought up the point that, these are relationships, they're ongoing, and some of these mismatched expectations are going to be a part of that. So, I know Thomas often gives this great advice. If you're starting in a new company, here's a set of interviews that, you might want to carry on just to get the lay of the land. I don't know if you want to talk about that,
please
Thomas.
Do. I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, credit to my first boss on my very first internship, because what he told me to do my first week, I've done in every job since. He was like, all right, here's what I want you to do. There are these 3 people. He pointed them out. That's their desks. You're going to go talk to them and you're going to ask them questions about what it is that they do. You're going to be curious. You're going to figure out what's important to them, what problems they're solving. And then the last thing you're going to do after thanking them is ask them who else you should talk to. And that was so good that he just gave me the entire week to do that. Because honestly, I was an intern and didn't have a whole lot to do other than onboarding my first week. But I've kept that habit every place I've gone, because that type of snowball sampling across the org, you get this varied perspective and you can almost start to map out like, okay, like I get it. Like these folks over here are really concerned about this thing and it kind of connects over here. You get this much grander sense at the very beginning of how the whole product org is coming together and where it sits in a larger business. It's, I think, one of the best tools you can do right at the start of your job.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned a week, because I give the same advice to people on my team, and I say take 30 days. So, like you're obviously doing other things, onboarding research, desk research, looking up secondary research, all the things we've already got, uncovered, and you're familiarizing yourself with everything that's going on. But I even do 30 days, man. Like I say way beyond a week. And this is such brilliant advice too. And I love this advice. And it helps you understand the system so that you can function within that system. Because I like to think of this as like playing a game. Like I wrote a book not long ago, and I have a chapter where I talk about onboarding and how you can, start off on the right foot. And I like to think about it as a game, right? You've got players, right? And you've got rules. You've got norms. You've got the way the system functions. You've got the way the system works. You've got power dynamics. You've got people who might be the captains or the manager, the people who have the power and the influence. And if you come in right out of the bat, and start swinging your weight around and be like, I'm the designer. The way you did this thing was stupid. And why would you ever make this decision? No one's going to take you seriously. First of all, that's probably the biggest problem. But none of those recommendations will ever get implemented because everyone's going to say, well, we tried that. We did that. Why would you even suggest that? We've already done that. It didn't work. And so having those conversations, it's brilliant. The other thing that I love about that question, who else should I talk to, is what I love to do here is, can you introduce me to them? Because when the director of blah, blah, blah introduces you, you suddenly have this air of credibility about yourself as well. So like you could reach out to them in cold DMs, or, you could say, hey, Jane, the CIO or whatever said I should reach out to you, which is a little bit, but imagine like a warm introduction, hey, that'd be really great. Like if you could you mind a warm introduction? That'd be great. Just so, because sometimes what I've found, especially like in your case, like as an intern, a lot of people are going to just like disregard you. You're the intern, or you're junior designer. Or whatever it is, maybe as you level up in your career, senior staff, IC, you get a little bit more credibility with the title. But a lot of times a junior designer, mid-level designer, someone's like, yeah, go talk to that stakeholder. And that stakeholder might be an executive. They might be a director. They might be, and so who are you? Who are you reaching out to me? You're just, whatever. And so hopefully people aren't like that, but you never know. Some people are. Having that little bit of credibility, that little warm introduction really helps. That's something I like to give that advice, but it's just a brilliant way to and then you build that little network and you start to expand it out and it snowballs, like you said, and you've got a great sense of the players, the rules, the norms, the system that you're working within, so that when you go and make those suggestions later, you have that air of credibility about you. Last week, I just released an episode with Thomas Wilson. I don't know if you know him from LinkedIn, but we talked all about like power mapping and stakeholder mapping and all that stuff. And this is something like a lot of people think about like stakeholder management, but that power mapping piece, like, knowing who the stakeholders are really important, but who influences who, who's got the control, who controls the budgets, who controls the resources, and who do I need to talk to get something done? And Thomas brought up like a really great point that like sometimes these people that control those things might be executive assistants. They might be somebody that you might think of traditionally as like being not important at all, but they control the schedules for the executives, and you like them, they might bump somebody else in favor of you, or you know what I mean? So like having that conversation, like if you don't do that, what you're talking about, like this is a really great example that's happened to me in the past. Like, oh, you need to talk to so-and-so. She's the executive assistant. If you want to get in their ear, you need to make friends with her. Like, so anyway, I don't know if you have any thoughts there, but that's something that I always found is like not intuitive. You would never think about that on your own. I don't think most people wouldn't unless someone pointed that out.
Yeah, I had a mentor, we met at a prior company that I used to work for. And one of the things he did for me, like my first week was, he was like, all right, we're going to go through the org chart. And he started listing out all the stakeholders and, they report up to this person and this is part of the product org and this is part of the design org. And, kind of the information that you would start to slowly accumulate in these interviews, but making it really explicit in sort of almost like you called it a power map. Like, I think that's exactly what he laid out for me. And I think that if, even as an intern, if you can start to sketch that out and maybe check your understanding with your manager, that'll help you to make it real explicit where the centers of power are.
I'll offer a different perspective because I agree that's something that's really useful. When I do this, I literally just have some bullet points, like a couple words. And like, I'll look at, if your company has like Bamboo HR, like one of those systems where you can look at our org chart, sometimes it's kind of helpful just to visualize and you've got that already built out. I try to make it as easy as possible. Like, for example, I know my family really well and how to interact with them and the different things that they all need. And I never created a chart about it, right? I figure I can probably start to learn a company and just keep a few bullet points on people. So anyone that's listening thinking like, oh, this sounds really like a lot. It doesn't have to be. You can also start real simple, just a simple notes out on your phone. Like, I met so-and-so today. They seem to really value this. This is their role. Talk to them when you need blank. They've got a great perspective on it, right? You can make it as easy or as thorough as you'd really like to.
I love this too. And when, this is something Thomas Wilson brought up in our interview. And I feel like there's a lot of the stuff that we're talking about. The problem that I think a lot of people see with this is it feels inauthentic. It feels forced. Writing notes about your stakeholders so that you may remember to talk to them about it or bring something up. It sounds some like salesy. And Thomas Wilson brought up a really great point. Like, salespeople are writing down these things and they keep it in their CRM, and they make sure to like ask you about, like your recent trip or your birthday came up. And then, like it sounds forced in a way, but at the same time, those little things they're little seedlings for authentic relationships, like imagine like every time you talk to someone, you're like, I don't know if you have kids, but every time you're like, yeah, didn't you have kids? Like, where are your kids? And it's like, you've talked to them about a couple times and I keep forgetting. I'm like, oh, I forgot you had kids, like, are you listening to me? Are you actually listening? Like, I understand that like you don't, it's not part of the job necessarily, but still like people are people and they get this sense that like, I've said this 1,000 times. How do you not remember that I had a dog that's sick or something? You know what I mean? So like keeping those little notes, it's just a really great way, if I'm talking to you and you're like, your kid, Sam or something, I'm like, yeah, how's Sam doing? I heard they were sick, like, or you mentioned on Slack, Sam was sick. They're doing better today, whatever, like using their name and, being able to actually call their name out and, it maybe you had to write it down because you're terrible with names. Like, I don't think that's inauthentic. I feel like the fact that you're trying to remember that, not to manipulate them in any way, but to help build those little foundational things that are the seedlings for, relationships. To me, that's important. And I would also point out, like thinking more about Stakeholder, I want to talk a little bit about tools and tactics and stuff. And we could talk more about this. But the idea though, like, Lawton and Tommy, you have very different ideas maybe of how to do this. One very methodical, the other's simpler, notes app on your phone. The fact that you're even thinking about these things though is 1,000% more than what most people are even doing with their teams. And so I think that the fact that like you're even thinking about it, regardless of how methodical you are with it or how thorough or how you document it here or there, you might not have like persona cards about every stakeholder, but like having just those conversations and thinking about it, I don't know what your thoughts are here, but I feel like that alone is just so much more than most people do.
I think you hit on a few key points there, right? There's one, having something. Format can vary person to person, can be a preference. Exactly how you note things down, if it's super formal, super structured or not, that matters less than actually just doing it, right? Going through the steps of thinking about all of the different people we work with and what motivates them, getting to know them. That's what's important. And then I really like the way that you articulated intent and mindset about it, right? I think we would all agree that if I was like, oh yeah, Lawton, we met with so-and-so the other day and they have a dog that they just got, and I'm going to bring that dog up on the next meeting because I want them to like me. And because they like me, they're going to give us money, right? That would be a little Machiavellian, a little weird. But if it's just like, oh yeah, Lawton, you've got kids, and I ask about your kids because, like, it's a big part of your life, and just genuinely interested in how things are going. That's different. So it's like the intent with which we kind of consume and act on that information is super important, and I really like the way that you articulated that, Jeremy.
Yeah, just don't be evil. I think is the because like at the end of the day, I think this is the thing. Like designers want to, when we say we want a seat at the table, what we really are saying is we want influence. We want to influence decisions. We want to influence people. We want to change their minds. We want them to think about something that they aren't thinking about today. That's what a seat at the table essentially means, I feel like. And it's funny, we frame it as a seat at the table as opposed to influence, because influence is like a quote unquote dirty word, right? And I don't think influence is a dirty word. I think influence can be a very good thing. It's just, it depends on how you wield it, and so don't be evil. I don't know. I like that. All right. So I want to talk a little bit about tools and tactics and things that we can actually start doing tomorrow. I like to have like these key takeaways. People can actually do some stuff. So let's talk about this. Tools and tactics. For me, like one of the things I always like to default to is like one-on-ones. But I'm curious, like what other things, maybe one-on-ones are exactly what you want. Talk to me a little bit about that.
I've got one thing that I'll actually tee up at the very beginning of this. Before we talk about even more specific tools and tactics, I want to introduce almost a mindset. When I think about digital experiences and creating them, I don't think about all the individual roles. I think about it just as overall product strategy is made up of a set of goals, priorities, and decisions that do three things. They achieve some sort of business outcome, they deliver on user value, and they do so feasibly. Those are the three things. And so anytime that I'm working on some given project, I'm not just thinking about user value, I'm thinking about product strategy at the higher level, and those three specific things. Jeremy, you mentioned the three-legged stool earlier. That's very much another way to think about it. By only weigh all my thoughts and decisions on user value and I completely ignore feasibility, I'm acting like an AI that's gone completely mad in terms of over interpreting its creed, right? Like we've seen AI examples where if you make it value some reward too much, it ignores everything else and you get really poor outcomes. It's almost like that. If you just say, oh, I'm only going to focus on user value. So if you just go into everything that you do with how is this affecting product strategy in those three buckets, that can be kind of a guiding light. And then maybe now we talk more about some of those specific strategies.
Yeah. So like a frame, a lens through which we make decisions, a lens through which we ask questions and have conversations to that end.
Yes. And just something that comes to mind here is starting with a default assumption. I think Thomas sort of articulated this earlier. If I were in this person's shoes, if I had their context, if I had, the expectations that were on them, I would be feeling the same way. So trying to like actually make a point to stop and think about what are the reasons why this person is acting this way, responding this way, or treating us this way, whatever the problem is interpersonally. Not attributing it to malice, like doing everything you can to say there's some good explanation for this that likely I would do the same thing in their shoes.
Yeah, I love that. Something that I again, this is sort of the point that the reason why I started the cognition catalog and the bias series is to make sure that, because I think this is something, it's impossible to get rid of your bias. I don't think you'll ever get rid of your bias. You're always going to have that split second thing in your head that says, this person is being mean to me. But the important thing to think about, I think, is like debiasing techniques might not keep you from being biased, but they might keep you from acting on that bias. If you take a step back and think about it and just take a pause and ask yourself, like, is this the right approach? Is that what they meant? Could it be something else? If I put myself in their shoes, might they be going through something, or what pressures are they under that I'm not aware of, and things like that? Before you write that mean Slack message or dirty email that you're going to regret as soon as you hit send, just taking a second to just pause and think. And like you said, just sort of take a step back and think about these things. It won't ever remove the bias, and it might not change like how your brain works, but at the very least, it keeps you from acting on them. And I think something else that I think is really important is like, we talked about your graduate degrees, your doctorate degrees. They might help you like spot things. They might help you call things by name. And I think that's actually really important, because a lot of times like we'll just have these impressions in our head and we might feel a certain way, think a certain thing, but being able to spot them and name them, I think is actually really important. And I'm not saying everyone needs to be a doctor, go to get a PhD in psychology or whatever, but I do think there's so many resources out there for you to get familiar with these things, to spot them, to understand, a logical fallacy when you see it, so that you can change your argument to go against it or whatever, or combat it, or change your approach so that, you don't fall for these biases, because spotting them and naming them, I think, makes it easier for us to circumvent. I don't know if you have any thoughts there, but I feel like that's really important.
I agree. And also, I should have said this earlier, love the cognition catalog. In fact, when you started doing that, I started saying, this is a great idea. So folks are definitely listening to that.
I need to get back on it.
And then if you're into reading, UX Psychology is a newsletter by Dr. Maria Panogiadidai. Maria goes a lot into things like, I think one of her most recent articles was about hindsight bias and how stakeholders can maybe hear what you're suggesting based off research findings and then say, oh, we already knew all this, and then how you navigate that. So you can then put the label of, oh, this is hindsight bias, here's how I can approach it. Being able to give a label to other people's behavior, at least inside your own head, can help you respond to it.
No, I love that. This is good, because I'm going to take that advice you got as an intern. Who else do you think I should meet to interview for the podcast? I'm going to ask for, I don't know if you know her personally, but I definitely would love to have her on and maybe do a warm introduction. That'd be nice. No, but I love that, man. And this is, again, like, yeah, the only reason I started the cognition catalog, and I need to get back on it. Like I said, I've been so busy with work, but it's so important to like be able to identify hindsight bias, or, whatever bias it is, and be able to call it out and spot it and redirect and like change how the team works in the future. You could even, I think we've got a little bit of hindsight bias here. We're focusing on this thing, and now that it's over, of course it was obvious, but we didn't think about this before. Here's what happened before. And it also gives you some strategies. And this is something I try to do at Cognition Guys. Like, how do you fight against this? Well, hindsight bias, you can document, you can, keep track of all the decisions. You can have a decision library. You can point back to that afterwards and say, look, yes, in hindsight, it was obvious, but when we made that decision, here's what we knew, we maybe could have made a different decision, but this is why, so anyway, yeah, this stuff is important, and maybe it's not going to help you fall for it in the future, but you could at least, maybe find some tactics to do that. I don't know. Anyway, so you guys mentioned in our previous chat, I think, and in your doc as well, like the value of one-on-ones and using one-on-ones to kind of go and I'm curious, like tactics for one-on-ones. Do you guys have any specific advice for people? This is something I give this advice every. It's the first thing I do a lot of coaching. People, this stakeholder, blah blah. The first thing I ask is, do you have one-on-ones? Do you have regular one-on-ones? How often have you actually talked to them one-on-one? You ever had a conversation with this person? So like for me, one-on-ones is like the default. That's where I start all the time. But I'd love if you have any, some tactics, some ways to make those one-on-ones more effective and valuable to help you with this idea of empathy.
Yeah, Jeremy, I love like simply asking yes or no, do you have them? Are they regular? Kind of like the point you were making earlier, like the 80-20 of this is probably just doing it. When I've done these with stakeholders in the past, keeping them at least to feel a little bit more informal, like, oh, let's hop down to the cafeteria and grab a coffee. And, I don't personally necessarily want these to feel like another one-on-one, right? Where you're necessarily trying to talk about a specific work goal, because you might not be talking about anything specific that's going on at the moment. It might just be like, I'm trying to get context, like, how are things moving and shaping in your world? What are the new initiatives that have been dropping you? It's all those things that you generally don't get a lot of insight into until you do have something that you're working on together. And there may be some reason why, I haven't heard from Jimmy in months. Well, it turns out they've gotten this new initiative that's completely changed direction on them. So it's good just to have at least those sorts of things covered in a one-on-one.
I love that. I love what you called out like going and grab a coffee or something. And this is, I don't want to say I want to go back into an office 40 hours, 9 to 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. But one of the things that I really miss about being in an office with people was like, hey, let's go walk around the block. Let's go walk down the street, grab a coffee, get out of the office for a minute, And now everything is remote and, that's fine. I'm not saying being in the office 40 hours a week is better by any means, but I do miss that ability to just like get out of your environment for a minute, have a walk, go for a walk. One thing that I actually like to do with my one-on-ones now is like take my one-on-ones from the phone and instead of like video call, just put earbuds in and just go for a walk while we chat, like as if we were on a phone call or something, as opposed to like a Zoom call or something. But anyway, that's something that I personally like that. And I everybody to each their own. Some people love that. Some people don't. Some people hate going in an office. I'm curious, the people who are remote, 100% remote maybe, what's some advice on like how to do one-on-ones effectively if you are remote? Is it really any different? Are there different tips and tricks for those remote one-on-ones that you might do differently than if you were in person?
I think I actually use the phone call one a lot. If there's something about a dynamic that it's either stale or there's something going on and I want to kind of like change the dynamic, I will do the phone call thing where it's like, hey, next one-on-one, let's take this away from our desks. I'm going to be walking around my neighborhood. Where are you going to walk? Like just kind of suggest like, let's get things moving. Because there's something weird about changing our habit and routine and or physical environment that allows for a change in a interpersonal dynamic. So I love doing that one actually. Another one, let's say you can't do that. It's still on video. Leave some room for spontaneity in that call. Don't try to manufacture it too much, but what can happen is you just jump on, it's your little window, their little window, that's it. All the little things that you miss of like being in the room together, like all that little, I guess, serendipitous elements of the environment that you both share that gives you at least something small, even if it just is a little bit of small talk about the weather or something about the name of the room. The conference room says funny names on this floor, don't they? And they kind of just add a little sauce to the conversation before you get going and just ease things in. So try to find a way to, not artificially, but introduce a little bit of that human element so that you're not just two boxes talking to each other.
Yeah, so it's funny you mentioned that. And this is something that I personally don't do. A lot of times you go join a Zoom meeting, people will blur the background. A lot of times there'll be like a company background they'll want you to use. So all you see is their head with like the company logo, you've probably seen those as well. And people turn those on. I'm going to move my mic so you can see real quick for those listening at home. But like I've got like all this crap back here. I got like Weezer soap because I love Weezer. I was in a Weezer cover band in college. Legos, like Star Trek books, like on air thing. I've got like, Legos here and like all these things right there. And I can't tell you the amount of conversations this has started. Random conversations. Someone's like, oh, I love Legos. Someone's like, is that a Weezer thing? Do you like Weezer? I'm like, oh, dude, I was in a Weezer cover band in college. I was actually on a call with an executive, like a C-level executive, like a couple months ago. And we started talking about Weezer because he like was a huge, it says something though, like a 40-year-old guy's like a C-level executive. And then like me, I'm like an individual contributor still, like not even a manager. I don't know what life decisions I made to get to that point. But anyway, we were both like Weezer fans, right? And so anyway, some people, they don't want to show off the personal stuff. But then when I think about like being in an office, like people are like, oh, my background's messy. I'm home. My background's messy. I'm like, curate your space. Like there's no excuse for where you set up your little home office to be a freaking pile of dirty clothes. Like, get a light. Like I got these little lights here. Get a light, make it presentable. And you add that a level of authority when you have a nice microphone and not, you don't look like you're in a cave with a hoodie on over your head. You know what I mean? Like that kind of stuff. We talk about influence, like the, other biases as well, the halo bias, the horn bias. People see that. They think you look like a slob. They're going to assume you do sloppy work. When you look presentable, they're going to think you do really tight buttoned up work. And, these are cognitive biases. These are how people think. Knowing that should, I think at least, influence how you present yourself at work, And maybe you do wear t-shirts because you're a designer and we can wear t-shirts and stuff. But like, you've got a clean background, you tidy up your space. Like that kind of stuff, you could then use it to create small talk, when you do curate your space. And so anyway, I'm not saying everybody needs to do that, teach their own. Some people would hear that and be aghast that I would suggest that. But I think that kind of stuff helps, especially if you're talking about trying to influence and using psychology and all that stuff, to your advantage, to not be evil. But, anyway, I don't know if you have any thoughts there, but I feel like that's so important.
It's interesting. What I'm taking away from all this is that you have to be a little bit more intentional, especially when you're working remotely, because some of these things like small talk, they do come naturally. And when you're, face to face with somebody, but you do have to engineer it a little bit. And, to your point earlier, Jeremy, like that can feel inauthentic and feel like you're like sort of like a salesperson and trying to manipulate this conversation in a weird way. But I'd argue that this is a way of really actually showing that you care about a person and that it's not a 100% transactional conversation all the time. So yeah, I'd say embrace the kind of awkward engineering of these conversations.
I'll also throw one thing in there. I wish I could attribute this and give it credit. I don't remember the article or the author. So if someone remembers, send me a DM. But it was like, small talk is just these three things, was basically the thesis of the article. And I was like, wow, that's actually really astute and a great observation. But it connects back to what we were talking about earlier. Jeremy, you said like remembering small details about someone's personal life. For example, do they have kids? Ask them about the kids. Ask them what's going on. The first and best form of small talk is just asking the other person about some relevant detail that you know about them. So for example, Jeremy, if we were talking for the first time in a while, like we are, I might ask you about your vacation, what's going on, like how was it, etc. Lawton and I said earlier, we talk about family and kids pretty often. So that's level one, small talk. Level two, just ask people, what are they busy with lately? What's keeping you busy? Because people are generally pretty busy. Very few people are like, oh yeah, I've got enough time in the day. And they like telling you what they spend their time on. And it's relatively neutral, right? It doesn't assume work, doesn't assume personal. It could be anything. And then finally, just shared dynamics. Weather is the easy one. Just like, oh, damn, we're in a heat wave. It's really hot, isn't it?
We did that when we started, yeah.
Exactly. So those are the three things. That's small talk, and that's all it is.
I love that, dude. And it's something I noticed. This is with remote. It was a little different, and I feel like maybe it's just been so long, I don't remember it, but being in an office, I haven't been in an office since before COVID in 2020. But when you start a meeting like on Zoom or Teams or whatever, people just jump straight into it, and they don't leave the space for small talk. And so, especially if you're the one controlling the meeting, give it 5 minutes. Like just let people, chat for 5 minutes before you start. You don't have to take up like all the 30-minute time or hour time, maybe you leave a little bit of time at the end or something. I don't know. It's easier to do in the beginning. People have to drop. But I personally will like schedule a meeting for 1:00, let's say, and 1:05 is when I'll actually start. And I'll say, yeah, how's everybody doing? How you doing? Yeah, good to see you. I haven't seen you in a while. We haven't been on a meeting together in a long time. I love your example. What have you been up to? Is it work? Is it something else? Yeah, it was keeping you busy. I haven't seen you in a while. like that kind of stuff. It's great. And I personally feel like it's one of those things you just, everybody wants to get into it. There's certainly times when you just want to get into it. You have to get into it. But, I just generally rule for me would be like, wait a few minutes, three minutes, and just small talk for a few minutes before you get into it and just make time for it. Because like you said, it's just really easy to just fall in that trap of just getting down to business and let's get started and blah, blah, blah. So anyway, I love that. All right, guys. So I have had you now. We've been talking for a long time. I could talk all day about this stuff because I love this. This is like the exact reason why I started this show, to be honest, is all these soft skills I feel like are just so damn important for designers. But we got to get out of here at some point. Before I get out of here, I've got 5 questions I like to ask all my guests to help our listeners get to know our guests a little bit better. But before we do that, any closing thoughts, any things that we didn't get a chance to talk about that you feel is incredibly important that we don't want to miss?
Something that we didn't cover, Jeremy. I think this topic, as you said, it's so important. It really has everything to do with our effectiveness as an industry, as a practice within an organization, whether we actually have any impact on the products that get shipped. And it's not something that you're probably going to get formally taught. I know that we've kind of talked about a lot of different ideas for how to apply this, but I think there's an underlying construct, right? An underlying skill that the listener is going to have to develop and practice in their own way. So I think, if nothing else, I hope that people have taken away from this conversation that this is something that they do want to get good at and that it's going to make them that much more effective.
Thomas, you got anything you want to throw in there?
I've got one more thing I'll throw in. One other thing that we didn't necessarily talk about that can lead to some of the negative feelings that make us feel other from stakeholders and put up a little bit of the wall and have that empathy gap is being overinvested personally in the decisions of a product team. Sometimes if they don't take our recommendations, or sometimes if they maybe don't fully prioritize user needs in the way that we think they ideally should and would, that can lead to some resentment, some negative feelings. Try to practice a level of cool indifference about it. Obviously, you want to have impact and you want your work to influence outcomes. We all do. But one thing that's been particularly valuable for me personally is practicing a level of cool indifference about the outcome. It's the result of a lot of different people's work. And I care that we deliver a good product, but maybe that's not always super healthy to care about it too much. In the end, I want our users to be happy with what we deliver. But you know what? If whatever product we're working on suddenly stops delivering value to users, there's competitors and they'll go to them. They'll be okay. So leveling, like how much you invest personally in those outcomes can really be helpful and just a productive way to think about things. So if you feel overinvested, try having a little bit of a farther indifference from the outcomes and trust your process and what you're doing to influence the outcome. Don't check the scoreboard too much.
Yeah, I love that. The other concept is sort of aligned to that too, which I think you're thinking of it seems like at a very high level, but even down to like the tactical like decisions that need to be made, you might completely disagree with the decision. I think being able to disagree but commit is also very important, to just say, well, I don't agree with this, but this is what the team decided. I'm not going to keep fighting you, and I'm not going to keep bringing it up, and I'm not going to tell you I told you so when it fails. If it fails, whatever. I will do my best, and I'll still do my work, and I will deliver what I'm supposed to deliver, even though I didn't agree with this specific decision. And I think a lot of times, like what I've seen too, is like one designers just get so like they just feel so strongly about the value of this thing they're building. When something changes or doesn't go their way, they're just destroyed inside. And, they're just like, I can't go on. And then even all the way on the other side, which is like, they will disagree with the decision so much that they will derail it and they will become so divisive. And, I've had product managers in the past that were like, listen, I'm coming to you with this because I've already talked to Tim. Tim's made up, by the way. Tim, if you exist, sorry. But, Tim is just so I know exactly what Tim's going to tell me, and I just can't today. I just need to get this done. Can you just do it for me? And when we talk about like empathy, obviously there's a disconnect. The person has no empathy for that product manager, but also you lose all the influence and the credibility when they don't even come to you anymore because you've just been so difficult. And so anyway, I don't know. I love that. Disagree but commit, even if you don't agree with it. Don't get too tied to everything. It's just a job at the end of the day. How many people am I getting paid on Friday? Yes. Okay. Whatever you want me to do. That's fine. I said my piece. I'm not going to keep fighting it. All right, guys. So like I said, we've got 5 questions I like to ask all my guests to help our listeners get to know our guests a little bit better. First thing that comes to your mind, you don't have to think too hard about it. Since we got two of you guys, I'll alternate. I'll go Thomas, Lawton, Lawton, Thomas, Thomas, Lawton, Lawton, Thomas. We'll go back and forth. First up, Thomas, you're up. What is your favorite non-design book?
My favorite non-design book. Jeremy, I've got a lot of really boring book recommendations. Most recently, I was recommending Finance Basics for Managers to people a lot this year, just because I think it's a really well-written book. It breaks down the 3 core financial statements really simply, and people who start reading it like really kind of start getting their business better, and they're like, oh, it all makes a lot of sense. I've got a lot of books like that, but that's a boring one. I'll say that I recently reread some Hemingway. The Sun Also Rises is a beautiful novel.
All right, Lon, what you got, man? Favorite non-design book?
I don't know if it's my favorite, but I'll add it here because I think it's relevant to the conversation with some caveats. Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. That one was one that was really impactful to me, kind of a crucial juncture in my life. I think I just started college and literally didn't have any friends where I went to college. So, it really helped me there. I reread it a couple years ago and I was like, a lot of this really holds up. There's some things that are, a little antiquated in it. And I remember I was telling my wife how great it is. And she picked up the audiobook, which I would not recommend. It's read by a 40s radio announcer, but there's a lot of good stuff in there if you pick up a hard copy.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, that's a good one. That one's always highly recommended by lots of guests on here. And when we talk about influence, man, I mean, win friends. We're not trying to win friends necessarily, but we do want to influence people. And, I think there's, like you said, there's a lot of old stuff in there that might not hold up today. But yeah, at the end of the day, though, I still think totally valid book. I will allow it. All right. Next up, what is your favorite non-design podcast? Lawton, you're up first.
Okay, cool. So there's one, so obviously Thomas and I started Drillbit Labs together. And, when I was making the transition from being an in-house employee to, what about starting a business? I started listening to this podcast called Founders. And I would actually recommend it to designers. And I mean, you don't have to be wanting to start a business to like it, because it's basically this guy, he reads bios of business founders, athletes, different influential people in the world. And he gives you all the play-by-play of going through this and what's relevant to your career. So that's one that I would highly recommend.
Yeah, I love that. And as designers, we didn't talk about this. I know in your doc, we talked a little bit about it and we just didn't have the time, but understanding the business and speaking the language of the business and all that stuff as it relates to the influence is really important, and empathy and what those people care about. But I think listening to a podcast like that helps you understand every story is unique, obviously, but hearing some of the pressures that a founder can be under, and especially if you work at a startup or something like that, understanding those things, if you work at Cisco or some giant enterprise IT team, it might not be as applicable, but still, I think understanding the pressures and the things that the decisions, the hard decisions, the challenges that people made, I think is super valuable. Thomas, what you got? Favorite non-design podcast?
I'll say right now, because they're still releasing episodes, there's a podcast called Search Engine that I particularly enjoy. And I think a lot of folks will resonate with, because a lot of episodes focus on, I'd say, the intersection of tech, society, and culture. There's a lot of really well-produced investigative journalism on just topics that you might not have really thought that much about. I'm trying to come up with an episode example now. Lawton, you might have others, because I know I've recommended it to you and you've listened.
I think my favorite was the airplane coffee.
Oh, yeah. There's an episode all about airplane coffee and should you drink it.
I've heard mixed.
Is things, it just a bunch of fecal matter? Yeah.
So what is for spoilers? Because I'm sure people are dying to know. Is it as bad as everyone thinks?
Depends on the airline.
Okay. Would you drink the coffee? There's a better way to. Would you drink the coffee in an airline?
I do.
For some reason, on a flight, I go with ginger ale. I don't know why, but ginger ale is always. I don't drink ginger ale ever, but on a flight, I drink ginger ale. It goes really well with those little Biscoff cookies. Because I try to avoid the coffee because, one thing too, it depends on the flight. But coffee, if I drink a lot of coffee, I have to pee a lot, and I hate getting up and bothering people to move and stuff in the flight. So I try to not have to go to the bathroom when I'm on a flight. That's my goal. I don't like bothering, hovering over people. I'm very cognizant of that. Empathy, I guess, as a designer. All right, let's see. Who's next? Thomas, you're up next. Favorite meal?
I mean, I've got a very specific answer. There was a restaurant next to the neighborhood I grew up in. I would order, granted, this is once I was an adult, but I would order a glass of whiskey. My appetizer was this crab dip, like baked crab with cheese and different spices and stuff that you spread over these crackers and a wedge of lemon squeezed over the top. Delicious. Main course, steak, potato, done.
Love it. Where was this? Where'd you grow up?
Raleigh, North Carolina.
Raleigh, North. Okay. All right. Lawton, favorite meal, man. What you got?
I am a man of relatively simple taste. I grew up in Texas, now living in Colorado, and my go-to is always Mexican food. And I recently learned about this dish. I don't know if it's a new thing, but like I didn't see it until recently, called quesadillas. So they're like these birria beef and cheese tacos that have been, it's almost like the French dip.
Oh, like a birria taco. Okay, well, I had
taco.
birria tacos. Is that like birria? Yeah, you dip it in the consomme or whatever, and they're like, grill. Oh, yes, dude. Oh, I love a birria taco, man. Oh my God. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I get like this insane craving for it every couple of weeks, and I just go on.
Yeah, I think it's funny. When I was a kid, I don't remember them all, but I think that's only because like we had like American Tex-Mex, and then now like more authentic dishes are coming and becoming more popular. There's a restaurant down the street from my house called Olla, and dude, best birria. I guess I'm pronouncing birria. You got to have the R in there. But yeah, the best birria tacos I've ever had in my life. You ever make it to Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky, we'll go get some birria tacos together. They also, this place does birria fries. So they'll like take like nachos, like imagine toppings for nachos, like cheese and refried beans and jalapenos and onions and cilantro and like all this stuff. And then they'll do like guacamole, sour cream, all that, and the birria meat, but they'll put it over French fries, dude. Oh my God. It's freaking amazing. Oh, it's so good.
I think that would be my favorite meal if I'd had it.
Dude. Oh my God. I'll ship you some. I'll freeze it and I'll send it to your way. All right. Let's see. What is your favorite vacation spot in Europe?
That's easy for me. Maui.
Ooh, I've never been.
You gotta go. My happy place.
I gotta go. Yeah, I've never been. I definitely need to get out there. But my beach is like Michigan now. It's just like not at all the same thing. But yeah. Anyway, one day I'll get out there. All right, Thomas, what you got? Favorite vacation spot?
Best place I ever been. Only went once. Went there for about a week. I was on the west coast of Costa Rica.
Ooh, nice, dude.
And it is just beautiful down there. Got to go to the rainforest too.
Nice.
Definitely one of the coolest biomes ever.
Oh yeah, dude. My wife and I did Costa Rica for our honeymoon, and we did it was 1 week, but we did 3 spots, which is way more than we should have done for like a honeymoon. We did the cloud forest, like up in the cloud, like stayed at this little ranch up in the clouds. We did the hot springs, and then we did Manuel Antonio down on like the Pacific side, dude. Oh my God, so pretty. The food, oh my God, yeah, dude. God, I would move there in a heartbeat if I could. I would definitely move there. Let's see. I found the picture of these Goody nachos. Gutierrez is the name of the family that runs this little taqueria. Anyway, check out that link when you get a second in the chat there, Lawton. It's the Goody nachos. So, oh my God, the Goody fries. They call them the Goody fries. Whew. Oh my God, I'm getting like hungry. I might go there for lunch today. All right, last question. What is your favorite design tool that is not Figma? Thomas, let's hear it.
Dude, I don't even know if it counts as a tool anymore, but this might just be me missing in-office, in-person stuff. I love whiteboards, man. I've got one whiteboard on my wall there, and I've got a second that I can literally just carry around to parts of the house and like 50 markers. I love just getting on the whiteboard and sketching out ideas before they have to take a specific digital format. Just like in spirit, what is it we're going for?
I love that, dude. Yeah, I love that. I miss a whiteboard. That's like the one thing I think I miss about being in office too. A lot of things. I talked about the one-on-ones and all that stuff. But whiteboarding and like going in a room with somebody and like drawing crap on a whiteboard. Like you can do it on Figma, Miro, or whatever, but I don't know, it's not the same. You got to have the marker in your hand and you mess up and you wipe and you smear it and it's all over your arm. All right. Favorite design tool that is not Figma. Lawton, what you got?
I mean, this is kind of a researcher's answer, but for me, I spend a lot of my life in Google Sheets, Excel, spreadsheets. I mean, it's just like multi-purpose everything tool for me, whether I'm literally doing analysis of user research or if I'm putting together like a project plan or a timeline or a table for some visualization that I'm creating. Like I spend a lot of time in Google Sheets. I think that everyone should have a baseline foundation and that.
Yeah, I love it. And I like Google Sheets because I feel like, I don't know, for me, like versus Excel, like sums and equations and stuff are just a lot easier to figure out in Google Sheets. I don't know why, but Excel, they just find so incredible. All right, guys. Well, this has been amazing talking to you guys. We are 5 minutes over our allotted time, so I apologize there. Before we get out of here, give everybody a plug. Let everybody know where they can find you, Drillbit Labs and all that stuff. Give yourself a plug.
Yeah, Drillbit Labs, we take a research-led approach to digital strategy. You can find us at www.drillbitlabs.com, or you can follow our newsletter at depth.drillbitlabs.com.
All right, guys. Well, thank you so much. Sign up for that newsletter. Check out Drillbit Labs. We'll link to all that stuff in the show notes. Once again, guys, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us, Jeremy. It's been a blast.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy.
Well, all right, y'all. That's it for Lawton, Thomas, and me for today. I hope we helped to shed a little bit of light on what I think is one of the most important topics out there, building empathy for your team, just as much as we build empathy for our users. But what does that look like for you? I'm curious, has it gone well? Have you run into issues with some really stubborn team members that make all of what we talked about today really hard? Let me know what you think on LinkedIn or shoot me an email at hello@beyonduxdesign.com. I'd love to hear from you. If you like what you heard today, don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you feel like you're getting something out of the show, I would love it if you left a 5-star review. That would help me out so much more than you know. And if you know somebody who might find any of this stuff useful, then why don't you tell them about it? That would be fantastic. And if you listened all the way until now, you've definitely earned a Merit-ish badge. Whether you survived tricky team dynamics, Figma fiascos, or pixel-perfect feedback loops, there's a badge with your name on it. Grab 2 sets for $20 at beyonduxdesign.com/badges. Just promise me one thing. Show me where you stick 'em. Help keep the show independent and ad-free. Check out beyonduxdesign.com/support to find out how. You can join Chris, Siraquan, Stacy, Radu, Megan, Andrew, John, Mark, Kevin, Jason, Michelle, Marty, Tino, Adina, Zoe, and many others, and help keep the show independent and ad-free. You'll get exclusive access to the entire video library of episodes, including episodes before they're even released. Get instant access to those video archives right now for as little as $5 a month. And if you're tired of staring at a blank Figma canvas, Mobbin gives you access to over 400,000 beautifully designed UI screens and user flows with a library that grows bigger every week. Kickstart your creativity, streamline your workflow, and level up your design process. Visit mobbin.com/beyondux to get 20% off Mobbin Pro and never run out of inspiration again. Remember to sign up for the newsletter and check out all the past episodes along with all the show notes at beyonduxdesign.com. I hope you keep coming back for more great UX tips from Beyond UX Design. And until next time, remember, you're more than a designer because there's more to UX and design. I'll see you around. Take care, y'all. It's hot, dude. Jesus Christ, it's hot in here. I need a break. Note to self, don't record in the middle of a heat wave ever again. I need to make that mental note.